Hi, happy weekend, everybody. This is Dr. Raoul Mathur with Mathur Dental Education, and I want to welcome you back to this week's episode of Weekly Wisdom. So, for those of you that are tuning in for the first time ever, this is a weekly video that I'll be making available through our email list on YouTube or on our Facebook site, just addressing some of the most common questions that I get asked or the most common issues. If you do have a question, just go ahead and email me at mathurdentaleducation@gmail.com and I'll bring it up here in the video and answer it directly. So, what are we going to talk about this week? One of the main topics I get asked to discuss is the question of should I start or should I buy an office? Now, I don't want anyone to think that I'm biased because I obviously have a program telling and educating people on how to start a practice. But I want to just show my mindset and why I am leaning more towards starting your own practice in terms of it being a better way to go for a lot of young dentists. Now, that's not in every situation, so I want to talk about that today. But that is one of the main issues I get asked to address. Should I start my own practice or should I buy a practice? So I think it's a good place to start by looking at the advantages or the pros of buying an existing office. With an existing office, you'll have existing revenue, an existing patient base, existing equipment, existing staff, and existing systems and procedures. It almost seems like you have existing success just waiting for you there. And sometimes that is the case. But I want to delve into that deeper. I want to first just focus on the two main objectives I have with practice ownership. Sorry, the two main financial objectives I have with practice ownership. In addition to the financial goals or objectives, there is just quality of life and more holistic type aspects that we can delve deeper into on another day. But financially, we want to, with practice ownership, provide an income for us to live and to build up an asset for the future. So, taking that into account, let's go back to the advantages, and I'm using that in quotes, with buying a practice. Because with each of those advantages, there are some questions that I have. So, for example, and now some of you might recognize these points as being, points I made if you've watched module one of my program. This is a bit of review for you, but I'm going to have some other information to add to this as well. So again, existing revenue. Yeah, but can you produce like the previous dentist? Do you do the same procedures? If you're buying an office from someone, are you able to do the entire repertoire of procedures that they can? Can you do it with the same speed? Can you do it with the same skill? Are you going to have the same good outcomes? Because if not, there's some value that can be lost there. Right away, when you buy that practice, that revenue might diminish. So that's something to keep in mind. The existing patient base, well, unfortunately, in most cases, you can expect to lose 30% of your existing patients. That's not personal to you. It's just that previous dentist has spent a career potentially building up their patient base with patients that match them really well. Whereas you might have a patient base that matches you really well. And it may not be everyone within this specific practice. So, on average, you can expect to lose 30% of the existing patients. Existing equipment. Yes, but how old is the equipment? Will you have to replace the equipment soon? Depending on the mathematical formula that was used to value the practice, you potentially could be paying for equipment twice. Once when you purchase the office, and then a year later if you need to replace chairs, an autoclave, and so forth and so on. A compressor, these are not inexpensive items. So it's something to think about as well. Existing staff. Fantastic. You may inherit expensive senior staff. Will you have to lay people off and will this alienate other staff and patients? This is not something nice to think about. Coming in and now you're the boss that's laying people off and putting people out of their jobs. It's not a great situation and not something to think about. But it is important to think about it. You know, if you're potentially taking on debt and financing to start your dream here, and you find that you've got some staff members that may have been with the previous dentist for 25 years and was instrumental in helping them build up their practice. But for you, if you're looking simply at, you know, their salaries that they've just gotten raises on every year and the value that they're bringing to their office, you might think, well, look, I can't afford to have a staff member that can't bring as much value as I need. And that puts you in a situation, and maybe an uncomfortable situation. On one side, you're looking at cost savings, but the reality of that is that it may rub people the wrong way. It may rub some of your patients the wrong way that are used to seeing that person every 6 months. And then the existing systems and procedures. Is the methodology of doing things within the office efficient? If you implement new ways, will staff be on board? So we talked about staff. What if you have staff that had been there for 20 years doing something the way that they are used to doing it? They could do it in their sleep, so to speak. And now you're trying to get them to do things differently. Is that going to be a smooth process, or is that going to be a lot of butting of heads? Something else to think about when buying a practice. Those are my main concerns. So I don't want to just give you, excuse me, I don't want to just give you the negatives or the potential concerns of buying a practice without talking about the positives of a practice. What might be a good situation where buying a practice is a great idea. Now, with these ones that I'm about to give you, I want to be clear that I would want all of them for me to choose buying a practice over starting a practice. So number one, right away, if you feel you could add value to the office in terms of revenue. Now, not to harp on the financial, but it is a major financial endeavor that you'd be taking on. So, for example, you could add procedures currently being referred, or you could work with a faster pace and be able to produce more just from your pace of work. Ultimately, you could produce more than the previous dentist. Perhaps so. My textbook example of this would be if you've got a dentist that's slowing down. So, for example, if you look at their last 10 years of billings, you'll see it almost go like a normal distribution graph where it went up and then over the last few years it's gone down. And simply because they're slowing down. Perhaps they're doing less days, perhaps they're just asking for longer appointment times, but they're still practicing, but simply they're just slowing down. So just you simply with your energy and youth could come in and outproduce them. That's a good situation. Another situation is you are bringing other procedures into the office. So, for example, if they're referring out root canals, implants, and you can keep that in house, and that's something you can add value to the practice right away. Number two, you can minimize the potential loss of the existing patient base if they already know you. Perhaps you're already an associate at this office. So this is a situation when you not need to win over strangers. You've already had a good rapport. And perhaps this is one of the driving reasons for you wanting to purchase the office. So you could potentially stagger the changeover so the owner and you are both there at the same time and they can give you their blessing directly. And over time, you and the owner become synonymous and it's a nice, gradual, seamless transition. That's another situation which I would really like. Number three, you already know the staff and you know that they're good value in terms of the duties they carry out and what they're getting paid. You're not seeing anyone with, you know, what I call legacy type situations where they really helped the original dentist build up their practice. The dentist is grateful and wants to give them a home forever. Now you come in and now it just doesn't make sense in terms of value. This is what we were talking about in the previous slide. But if you look at that and you see that there's very few of those type situations and everyone is good workers, they're adaptable and you know this already, or if there's maybe only one person that you might have to let go and you don't think it's going to really cause much backlash amongst the other staff or the patient base, that's a more of an ideal situation. Number four, you've got very efficient and healthy systems that are in place and the staff execute them really well. So you don't really see in which a way in which you'd want to make improvements. You don't really think that you can improve performance in terms of systems. This is another really positive signs to buy that practice. And number five, you have the equipment evaluated and they're deemed in good shape. You can hire people to come have a look during that purchasing process. So, for example, when you're having a look at the financials, you can say, look, I'd like to have my guy come have a look at the equipment. I look at the chairs. And I think that should be just a regular standard process. And if you look at it and you say, well, look, this has been well maintained, great offices often will have a ledger of how things have been maintained. So, for example, at our offices, we are on a system where we have a monthly visit from the maintenance person, and it's being maintained, and the O rings are getting changed, and everything's getting lubricated, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a positive sign as well. So from module one, you may have seen this slide. My goals with practice ownership, again on the financial side, is to double the value of the practice within a 3-year time period. It's harder to do when you're purchasing an existing office. So, for example, you can buy an office at 2 million, and to try and grow it to 4 million, I believe is much more difficult and harder to achieve than starting an office for 500 and growing it to 1. In fact, 1.5 to 2 is a pretty logical and reasonable expectation. That's what I've been doing with my practices. So the potential to earn 2 to 3 times your investment within 3 years, that's realistic. So hopefully I painted a bit of a picture in terms of starting versus buying. I'm not against buying, but there's certain conditions I'd want. I think to be successful, there's specific things you need to look for in staff, in terms of systems and ways of doing things. And it's hard to find that in other offices. When it is, it's unique. It's not impossible to find, but it's unique. So, some questions I've gotten since last week. So, first question. Last week, you mentioned that you're in favor of setting up practices for less expense than through the supply companies. Do you use less expensive equipment and/or supplies? Uh, so, for those who saw last week's video, if you haven't, it's on YouTube. Otherwise, just email me and I can send it to you. Um, I was talking about how when you're starting a practice, you want to create that situation in which you can set it up for not only less than the supply company would be quoting you, but for less than a turnkey practice is available, so that you're lowering your risk profile. So that's heads, practice is successful and you go off into your sunset of success. Or B, the practice is unsuccessful, but you've still made money because you've created something with a greater value than what you put into it. So, do you use less expensive equipment and supplies? No, I do not. So, I'm not against anyone who's using refurbished equipment or anything like that, but I use the same new equipment and supplies from the same companies that most practices do. So, the savings I'm talking about, they don't come from just doing things cheaper. I don't really think that's a really unique system or process, just buying secondhand everything. The savings that I'm discussing come from two main areas. The main one is just doing it yourself. We're cutting out the middleman here. There's no markup between you and the builders and the planners who are building your practice. The supply company is the between person. I'm nothing against them. They have the knowledge of how to build practices. They've done thousands of them. You just need to know the knowledge of how to do it. And if you can do that, you can save hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's what my entire program is about. And number two, by strategically setting up your office with specific layouts in mind, so you can save a lot. This refers to the operatory layout, the supply layout, the whole office design. It can be done in a way that's efficient and requires less square footage, which means you're now paying less for your builder because they charge you by the square foot, and you're paying less rent, which is because they charge you by the square foot. We can discuss that more. Watch module one. Go to my website, mathurdentaleducation.com, and go to the link at the top. Start your own practice, and you can see module one there. The next question. So last week you discussed the perceived obstacles that dentists have to starting their own practice. I am mainly concerned with fear of competition in my area. Right. Should I go rural to open my practice? What should my strategy be? So, two main parts of that question. So, fear of competition, that is normal and natural. So, but is it based on the assumption that all dentists, fear of competition is normal and natural, but the flaw in that fear is that it's based on the assumption that all dentists are just the same and provide the same service, which I don't agree with. A filling appointment at one office can be completely different from a filling from another office. I understand you're getting the same filling at both, but how? We need to match the dentist with the right situation. So, specifically, we want to match up the right dentist to the right practice identity with the right brand to the right patient base and then to the right geographic location. If we can effectively match and marry these aspects together, there is a real chance, a real logical conclusion for explosive growth. So, first, we need the right dentist with the right identity. And then from that identity comes a brand. And then you understand who that patient base is best served with that. And then we look for a location with those patients. So, two dentists can have the exact same training and quality, but they can leave patients with completely different experiences. A filling with one dentist can lead the patient to tell four friends, and the filling with another dentist can lead to the patient telling nobody. Now, I'm not talking about personality. I'm not even talking about quality of work. I'm talking about just the overall match. One practice can just be a better match for a specific demographic of people. This is why I'm not only looking at dentist population ratios when I look at practice locations. So, for example, this is just one example. If you got a patient who needs to take off work to come in to get a filling done on a Tuesday afternoon, and the filling is great, the experience is great, but you've got another dentist that's open Saturdays and evenings. For them, that's just a no-brainer. It has nothing to do with you as a dentist. That's just one. That's just one small example. There's a lot of different examples about matching things up properly to better serve you and to give you a better chance at reaching success. The second part of that question is about rural dentistry. So I owned a small rural practice for 4 years. So it's very rewarding, both financially and in terms of just the interaction with the patients. Now, I could be generalizing here, but I found it very rewarding on a daily basis treating patients from rural areas. I don't know, it was a farming community. I found that people were so um, appreciative of you being there, but you treating them because you're keeping them from having to drive 2.5 hours into the city, and oftentimes they're trying to avoid that drive as much as possible. So you coming out and setting up there can be something where they're appreciative on a daily basis. Um, However, the dentist population ratio, which I completely understand, I just talked down on and said it's not the most important thing. But in rural areas, it does become a bit more important. Because there's not as much choice. So the dentist population ratio can change drastically with the addition of just a single office. So if you're a single dentist that's set up into a hub rural community with 3,000, all it takes is one more dentist coming into the area, and now it's a 1 to 1,500 ratio, just with the addition of a single operator. So that's the part that can sometimes negate your rural advantage, so to speak. Also, when you're selling a rural practice, the valuations are usually less unless you're selling to corporate. So corporate's just looking at the money and they're just doing their mathematical formula. But it's difficult to get full values for the leasehold and the patient charts because it's easy to set up in rural practices. So if you're selling your practice for, $1.2 million and you're saying, look, I've got this whole thing set up here, but it's easy for a dentist to quickly lease a space and be busy from day one because it's a rural area and there is so much demand, then your practice becomes worth less as a byproduct. I have seen dentists that have had a full career and had really tough time selling their practice and had to, really bring the price down, so to speak. And that can be really tough because for many dentists, that selling of the practice is their retirement. So instead, I would just focus on finding the right location for you. So again, we want to match up the right dentist with the right practice identity the right brand creation, the right geographic location, and the right patient base. There is a process to go through which will help you put you in a position to succeed. Thank you. It was great talking to you. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Just a reminder of our program, how to start and run a dental practice successfully. It's our online program. There's 23 modules split into two parts: Prudent Practice Startup and Flying First Year Success. Prudent Practice Startup is taking you from the thought of your mind of wanting to have your own practice right through to a fully built out practice that's ready to go. And then part two is Flying First Year Success. That's taking you from your built out practice to the end of your first successful year of practice. It's all within, both parts are within one program. As always, if you have any questions, please email me at mathurdentaleducation@gmail.com. Have a great weekend and rest up. Take care.